Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to a very special Independent Writers of Southern California Green Room meeting. Things are a little different right now, and I'll explain why in a minute, but there's something that's been kind of cooking in the back burner, and I got together with Gerald, and we decided to do something a little special tonight. I wanted to give you a chance to find out a real active author, somebody who's actually doing it, not just talking about doing it, but has actually been publishing and knows what's going on today. And we want to basically kind of pick his brain and find out what's working and what's not working. So thank you, Gerald, for joining us here. We'll talk a little bit more about you in just a minute, but let me give us a couple announcements. We have some very good things coming up. This Sunday is IWOSC Reads Its Own, where we've got a couple dozen IWOSC members that are going to be reading. You can go to the website to find all about that, but it is this Sunday, February 20th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. And so that's going to be on there. I believe it's closed in terms of the list of readers, but if you want to find out kind of what opportunity we have for IWOSC readers, or IWOSC members rather, to actually read and even get a little bit of a media clip for their own use and all that, IWOSC Reads Its Own is a great opportunity. We used to be at Rahman's bookstore doing that back before the pandemic, and since then we've, like everything else, gone online and have had a really good time with that, and have been doing that twice a year now for a couple of years. It's been quite a lockdown. And then Monday, February 28th from 7 to 9 p.m. is our annual experts panel. And Ina Hildebrandt will be producing our romance and women's literature panel. And she got a great panel. We got about 5 different experts on there talking about all things romance and women's literature. So if you're all interested in that, please attend. And if you're not, still attend. I attended Robin Quinn's satellite meeting last month, where she had a romance writer on, Clive Rose. And at the end of it, I was kind of doing the engineering for it. And at the end of it, I thought, I'm the last person in the world who will ever probably write a romance novel. But the interview with Clive was absolutely fascinating to learn about her method, how she does her research. She does period romance, so she has to find out certain things. And so it was, even though I don't know the genre, it was fascinating to learn how a writer actually does what they do. And that probably kind of got the thing heated up for doing this tonight. So we're doing something a little special tonight. A little bit of bad news. Normally, Gary Young is also with me on our green room meetings and attending our things throughout the month. Unfortunately, Gary and Kathy's youngest son, Jordan, died in a tragic motorcycle accident at the end of January. And so he's taking a little bit of time just to kind of take care of his family and recover from that. You can imagine losing a child is a devastating thing. And so they're just kind of taking some time to get through that. I know a lot of you would just love to let them know about your love and your care for them. If you want to send anything, please just send an email or a note to the IWOSC email, info@iwosc.org, and Vicki can pass that on. We don't want to deluge them as they're just trying to get their legs out from underneath them, but keep them in your thoughts and prayers. It's a tough time when you lose a child. And so Gary is, they're doing well, but as you can imagine, it's a difficult time. And so we told them that we'd cover, the green room and other things this month. And so, when the cat's away, the mice will play. And so I took that as an opportunity to try something. And as I was talking to Gerald, what really kind of got me started on this is decades ago, that shows you a little age-wise here, there was a show on Bravo called Inside the Actors Studio. And they would do an interview with different actors in front of an actor school back in New York. And it wasn't so much the celebrity that fascinated me, but it was the, behind the scenes expert sharing with students. Here's kind of the secret sauce. Here's how it works. Here's what it's really like. And I just find every one of them fascinating and kind of got hooked on watching a number of them. In fact, Gerald was telling me that it's actually kind of being revived. They're doing that again now. So that got me kind of thinking, well, one of the things we really need to do at IWOSC is get the people that are really doing it in front of our members. So that way they can ask questions, they can find out what's working, what's not working, because a lot of the advice of even a couple of years ago has changed, especially with the lockdown. The publishing world has changed, the online world has changed, and even social media has changed. We talked about that last month in the marketing panel. The things that were hot, a couple of years ago, like Facebook, nowadays, that kind of ties you to a certain generation, and you might need to be on TikTok or something else. So it's helpful to basically talk with someone who's actually doing it. And so the first person on a very short list for me was Gerald Everett Jones. Gerald is also on the board of Independent Writers of Southern California. And let me just read a little bit of his bio so you can find out a little bit about who Gerald is and what he's done. He's a freelance writer who lives in Santa Monica, California. And Preacher Raises the Dead, there on his little picture there, is his 12th novel. He's a member of the Dramatists Guild, Women's National Book Association, and Film Independent, as well as a board member here at IWOSC. He holds a Bachelor of Arts with honors from the College of Letters, Wesleyan University, where he studied under novelist Peter Boynton, who wrote Stone Island, F.D. Reeve, who wrote The Red Machines, and Jerzy Kosinski, who wrote The Painted Bird and Being There. He is the host of the Get Published radio show, which I have seen him actually produce live, and it is quite a good production. You can find that on getpublishradio.com. And his book reviews are published on the web by Splash Magazines worldwide. So you can find that at splashmagazine.com. Gerald, thank you for being willing to be my guinea pig tonight, and just to share a little bit with everybody kind of, what you're doing and what works and what doesn't work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I'm very gratified to be asked to join. And, our hearts do go out to Gary and Kathy, two such dedicated people. And I mean, especially Gary gives so much to this organization. And, maybe not everybody knows that he's also officer of the Dramatists Guild, also Publishers Association of Los Angeles. And so he's really given himself over to promoting professionalism really across the board. And when you talk about Actors Studio, that's really what we're talking about, is we're talking about process. And tonight I was hoping, and it's interesting that you've opened the door to it. I was hoping that we would talk about some inside baseball kinds of things and not be afraid to ask those questions, because, when we're on a podcast or YouTube or being interviewed, we're very aware of the persona, the mask, if you will, that we're wearing for publicity. And it was interesting. Actually, my wife Georgia was interviewed on Book Publishers Association of Book Publicists Association of Southern California last meeting, and their vice president Bruce Brownstein expressed something that, in a way that I had not heard it before, and it really struck home. And he said, as publicists, he said, we're really interested in making your fans and building a fan base, making them know you as a person. And he said, once they know you as a person, they want to buy your book because they want a piece of you. And I thought, this is really turning things around, because I know, on Get Published Radio, our audience was people like IWOSC members, people who burn to get that book out, sit down at the kitchen table, or sit in their office and become an expert, whatever. And it became rapidly clear that our audience are writers, but it turns out that 25% of readers have at least thought about being writers. And the model of doing interviews with writers of, here, I want to talk about my book, that I won't say so yesterday, it's just kind of a snore. I mean, frankly, is we found that gearing our episodes, and I had two incredible co-hosts as well. One was science fiction writer Thomas Page, and then a young journalist, Cheyenne Cockrell. And she was very fact oriented, and he was very kind of all over the place. Big Ian Fleming fan. But we'd have debates among ourselves, and we would really center it on a topic. And the thing that was really fascinating about that series of shows, which are still up there in archives, we haven't done new ones recently, but they're all wonderfully evergreen. Our most popular show was on spirituality and metaphysics.
Interesting. Wow.
And we had a debate among ourselves in our production meeting, and we said, well, who can we get for this? And Cheyenne said, well, if we get an author, we're just going to get their slice of that big topic. There'll be a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Baptist or whatever. And why don't we get a reader? Why don't we get somebody who's widely read, and just give us a survey of what's on your shelves? And so I knew Dennis Hutchison from Afterglow of Sedona. He's a therapist, and he was really widely read on near-death experience, coma, afterlife, reincarnation, multiple lives. And it wasn't like he believed all of this or any of it. I still don't know to this day, but he was very widely read, and he gave us such a toe dip into those various topics of, oh yeah, I'd like to know more about that. And actually, from the standpoint, Preacher Raises the Dead, I'll use this as that entree. I was very much fascinated with near-death experience and the medical research that's being done now around people who have been revived after they've been pronounced clinically dead. And this is a topic of very active clinical research, of gathering metrics on what percentage of people saw white light, how many saw relatives, how many lost their fear of death, how many feel positive about the experience. And again, these are not theologians conducting this research. These are medical scientists.
So I want to probe a little bit here, because you're getting into Preacher Raises the Dead and the Evan Wycliff series, and last year you were writing about Africa. So
that's right.
Obviously there's a shift that took place here. So for the sake of the folks that are here listening, you obviously, the son of Norman Mailer, and you've been in the publishing world forever and ever and ever, right? Is that your background, or what got you into writing?
I wrote primarily nonfiction in various media for most of my professional career. When I got out of college, I had auditioned at Juilliard. I was going to act, and auditioned for John Houseman, who said, "Why do you want to be an actor?"
Oh, lovely.
That was how we concluded the audition.
Oh, dear.
But I had actually been ill when I was in college, which was one of the things that one of the reasons that when I reported for the Vietnam draft, they said, "Why don't you just go home?" Which was, that was what happened. But I realized that if I was going to go to New York and struggle, I'd be waiting tables, and my health might not withstand that. So I went back to Chicago, where my parents were at the time, and I got jobs in advertising copywriting. So okay. I worked in that. I worked in industrial film. I worked in educational film. I worked in corporate film. And then from corporate, somehow, and it was during a recession, actually, I couldn't find anything in Chicago, believe it or not. But Detroit was hiring.
Huh.
And I went to Detroit, and that's where I got involved in, I put on my producer hat, and I got very much involved in the early days of computer graphics. Okay. And from computer graphics, there became a whole industry of writing how-to books on how to fix when Excel is broke, and all about Microsoft Word and DOS for Dummies and all. So I wrote those kinds of books with an agent for mainstream publishers for more years than I care to admit. And those were contracts, writing to outlines, professional editor sitting on my shoulder.
Yep.
If I wanted to depart from the outline, I had to beg permission. Never got cover consultation, never got, God forbid, cover approval. I wrote at times with collaborators, with subject matter experts, some of whom got their names on the cover, some of whom didn't.
Right.
But then I got more, all along I was writing fiction. You know, I was writing plays, and then I was writing screenplays. And actually a couple of my screenplays won awards, didn't get made. That's Hollywood, right?
Yep.
But then I got to the point where I think the first novel that I did turn a screenplay, which was a comedy, into a novel. That was My Inflatable Friend.
So that was the shift, because a lot of people got involved in the technical computer writing. I did the same thing. I was a technical editor during that time too. But what made you do the shift? Was it the screenwriting that was?
Well, it was
more about story rather than,
you know, screenwriting has gone through a series of milestone changes, as has music. The music went through the digital age first, technically, because its bandwidth is narrowest. It was easier to distribute music than the other media. You know, film is obviously very wide bandwidth,
right.
And you know, books had not so much to do with the bandwidth, because it doesn't. A book file is not very large, but the display technology. There was the you know, Sony actually had pioneered the ebook, but they had no clue how to sell it. They're going to sell it to colleges and libraries. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't work.
I had one of those readers, and they were very, very
and
cool.
It was Philips e-ink technology,
yep.
Which Bezos in his wisdom adopted, and that is not the same technology as an iPad and an iPhone. It's little rotating plastic balls, as it turns out. But that was overcome. But what happened with screenwriting was, the first thing that happened in my lifetime was the Writers Guild strike, and up until that, and my relationship with the Writers Guild is probably a whole topic for another meeting. But the thing that happened there was, up until that time, it was a very rigid guild rule that members could not write on spec. Okay, a producer can't say, you know, if why don't you write this idea, and if I like it, I'll buy it. Okay, at the very least, they would have to give you an option, you know, and whatever. But what the strike did was, it caused very highly professional, well-trained writers to go home and sit down at their kitchen tables and write spec screenplays, because they had nothing else to do.
I remember 6 months after that, we got a whole glut
after that. It was raining and snowing, good spec screenplays.
Good spec, yeah.
So the studios go, why do we have to hire people to develop this stuff? We'll just hire readers to sift through this stuff. Yep. Well, now that you can take a high definition camera, or even your iPhone, out and shoot a 15-minute short and put it up as a webisode, the same thing is going on with filmmaking. Is, why should we produce sitcom pilots? Okay, a sitcom pilot costs $3 million to produce. Okay, why don't we just watch and see who gets some clicks, and we'll make them a deal?
Yeah.
And that's what's going on these days. And the same thing is going on in the book world. Okay, you've got the big five, which tried to become the big four, and the feds wouldn't let them do it. But their business models are imploding, because printing costs are going up, and people frankly just don't want to pay $30 for a book, even if they like paperbacks. Okay, now that's not to say that paperbacks won't continue to be available, and they're still 75% of the market. But the readership has expanded, but the number of new titles that are published is about 1 million a year, especially because of self-publishing. And you know, we got this. One of the questions we got was how to write a query letter. I would say don't. Your odds are better. I mean, if it's fiction, your odds are going are better going to Vegas. Okay, I've probably written 300 query letters in my time. The number of successful query letters that I've had has been 0.
Wow.
Okay, because the number of agents is declining because
Right.
the advances are. It used to be when I wrote nonfiction books, when I wrote Microsoft Excel Quick and Easy. Okay, my biggest selling book. Okay,
That's a good book.
I got a $20,000 advance for that book.
Wow.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you had an agent that sold a nonfiction book of that category these days, something like that, although people don't need how-to books anymore, you might argue, you might be lucky to get $1,000 advance.
Yeah, I've
Now,
heard that a couple of years ago the average was 750.
you're
So
you're
yeah,
still participating to the same royalty participation. So it's, if the book does well, yes, you'll get your money sooner because it's how fast the advance earns out.
sure.
But if the agent's stake in that game is 10, 15, 20% of that $1,000, how do they make a living? They're going to have to represent 200 authors, to pay their mortgage in Los Angeles. So it's not coincidental that you will find two things happening in the agent community. The first is you will find them, if you're writing novels, they will want you to write linear stories that are not terribly complex, that don't use a lot of flashbacks, that are not terribly psychological or inward thinking, and that show and don't tell. Okay, now whole other seminar, when do you show, when do you tell? The short answer is novelists know how to do both. Right. You can't do one or the other. I just picked up a Paul Auster book because I'm a big fan of his. The first 5 chapters are all tell. Okay, so you're telling me he's a rank amateur? He just got nominated for the Booker Prize. Yeah. So I mean, there's no rules. There's just no rules. But the reason the agents are saying that is it's easier for a reader at a studio to see a screenplay in something that is written like a screenplay. And the screenwriters know, do not coach the actors. Don't tell them what emotion, he said sobbing. Okay, well, Joaquin Phoenix is going to decide whether he's sobbing or not, or he'll have a fit with the director, and they'll decide whether he's not going to be your call. But you're not your call. Don't describe the scene, because the the way you would in a novel, don't set the stage, because number one, you're eating up white space. That it's going to take the reader a while to read. But number two, the director and the scenic designer and his entire creative staff and the way it's lit, all that is going to be their province. Don't take that away from them. Well, okay.
About 10 years ago, I was going to some conferences, both for screenwriting and writing. And the thing I saw was that Hollywood was scared. Movies were getting to be $200 million to do a movie. And they were saying, well, if we find a book like Hunger Games that all of a sudden has millions of followers, it's a much more likely chance that a movie based on that will be a hit than if we just do some spec screenplay.
And that's the other thing that's happened in the screenplay world, is that the spec screenplay, you're going to take, there'll be these courses offered how to turn your novel into a screenplay. Don't find an agent who sells movie rights to, build up the fan base for that book. Again, this is Hollywood gossip. So, having not sold movie rights to any of my books, even though I've done life story rights agreements for screenplays and those kinds of things, I'm aware of some of the legalities involved, but I have been told that it is much more likely for, especially a series, because a cable series for a producer is a much more profitable project, because for the price of a feature film, they can often produce the entire season because they're using the same sets over and over again, same people over and over again, and maybe not so many outtakes, but that it's easier to monetize that. And from that writer standpoint, think about what cable has done to the perceptions of the audience. Now that the audience is familiar with binge watching an entire season or maybe even multiple seasons. You know, it used to be that the screenwriter's rules of thumb had to do with how do I take my 500-page novel and squash it into 2 hours of screen running time. And it's true, you have to shorthand a lot of stuff, and you have to cut from, you know, from here to 10 years in the future, and maybe you don't explain much or that kind of thing. But in a cable series, you've got real character development. You each major character and even some minor characters will have their own episodes, their own subplots. And one of the things that I've often shared with people is, you know, I don't know that I've ever walked out of a movie theater and said, you know, I really miss those guys. But if I finish a cable series, it's like there's this hollow place in my heart for a week.
I'm with you there. Well, let's move back to the novels, because you've done both. You've been agented, and then you've also done self-publishing. So you talked about not doing a proposal. I've heard the advice of it's worth going through that exercise, because it really helps you focus down on who your audience is and why people should, you know, write.
Well, a book marketing plan is a good thing for a fiction writer to have in the drawer. It is a mandatory thing for a nonfiction writer to send with a book proposal submission. But often what I think that a rule of publishing that has not changed actually is that a nonfiction book, you don't write the whole book and then send it out. You send a book proposal, which is typically an outline, 2 sample chapters in a book marketing plan. That's what you want the agent to read. That is what you want the agent to submit to the publishers, because the publishers still in the nonfiction space, they will assign an editor. Now that might not be an activist editor the way that they were in the old days, because those people tend to be expensive and they can't spend that much time with you. But the publishers typically, you know, we really have to separate fiction from nonfiction. Nonfiction still is at its core commercial, and you are as a nonfiction author, one way or another, you're setting yourself up as an expert. If it's academic, you're a professor who's, you know, this is my field, and I this is my original research, and I'm, you know, I know more about it than anybody else. Or you're like our wonderful colleague Ruth Freckman, who has a diet counseling practice, nutritional therapist, and she's got a book that is her calling card.
Right.
That is her credential. That is her business card. Is no, I don't have a card. I have a book.
Yeah. Well, let's stay with fiction then, because there's a lot of teaching out there about nonfiction and calling card, you know, business books and things like that.
And I don't do that anymore.
Well, there you go. Like I said, the last few books you've written haven't been that. So let's talk about, you know, the shift for you and you know, the Evan Wycliff, you know, series there. Those last 3, you're into something here, and these are basically the mystery genre.
They're mystery thrillers, maybe.
Paranormal?
That's one of the things that's interesting about it is, yes, they have to be categorized in the mystery category because you have to pick a genre in order to market this stuff. And of course, the idea is a series with a protagonist that's carried through, and now you'll see on Amazon Evan Wycliff #1, Evan Wycliff #2, and the mysteries didn't used to be listed that way. Now there are romance and mystery, fantasy, horror writers that's got like books of 30 series. How did they do that? I have no idea. You know, is there software that generates those?
Well, #1, there is. #2,
separate meeting.
Yeah, separate. Yeah, but there was an Amazon deal where these guys are writing these kind of short stories. They're in 6 different episodes.
Oh, the novella program, right? Kindle Vella. Yeah.
And it was before that, and I forget the name of the program, but it was amazing because their approach was exactly the same as a sitcom series, where you've got to get 10 things out. And so you work on these kind of things, and you're doing them, you know, a couple weeks before you're actually, you know, going to shoot them. And so these guys are writing, and they come up with like six short books that are all part of the single story. And so instead of it being one novel, it's 6 short ones. And the method was to give away the first one for free. If you liked it, then you buy the other 5 to finish basically, the series or the book. And Amazon spun up this whole new section of it. And it's very interesting to see whether that's really going the way, because the model was very much a TV model in terms of production. And these guys went from doing these things themselves to actually getting crews of people and running the crews. So they would give them, so here's our idea for a story. Boy grows up on this desert planet, and all of a sudden his parents are killed, and he's related to this guy named Darth Vader, and yada yada yada, and away we go with the space western. And you guys write it, and then we'll give you notes along the way. And then they go away, and this little group writes it, comes back, and then these guys are producing half a dozen books a year by having these little independent teams that they're running. And it was an amazing publishing model for feeding the beast, if you will.
Yeah, James Patterson admits to doing that, and you will see
clearly he does.
You will see that he actually gives cover credit to his collaborators, which of course some, you wonder whether Walter Mosley writes 100% of all those. He's got quite a few. He's got multiple heroes, protagonists in multiple series, and he's really a talented and prolific writer. But then again, you also wonder, as Isaac Asimov had 1,000 titles. The guy had help. And James Mitchell's books were 3 inches thick. I think there were some researchers there, about history of Hawaii. But no, going back to Evan Wycliff, I actually hadn't planned to write a mystery. My first series, as I said, it was a romantic comedy, coming of age, if you will, skirt chasing, young person's perspective kind of comedic book, My Inflatable Friend. And then I had 3 in that series: My Inflatable Friend, Rubber Babes, and then Farnsworth's Revenge. Farnsworth was the young fellow who's the car jockey, who's the protagonist, who's chasing, anything in eyelashes. Farnsworth is the kind of the dirty old man, the villain of the piece, the foil, so
how do you go from there to Evan Wycliff?
Well, I had admired, part of it starts with the authors that I admire. And I really, had a lifelong admiration for Peter DeVries, which he was a New Yorker editor and poet. But the thing about DeVries was he had been brought up in the Dutch Reformed Church, extremely conservative Dutch Reformed Church in Chicago. And his books were comedies pointing fun at religion and sex. Now, one of his famous books, probably, it could never have been in the school curriculum, but it might not even be able to be published today, Slouching Toward Kalamazoo, which of course is a play on Slouching Toward Bethlehem, but Slouching Toward Kalamazoo is about a middle-aged school teacher who has an affair with her young student. Could you write that story today? Absolutely not. Absolutely. That would be so non-woke as to be, I don't know where. But DeVries was brilliant. And also, I think, if you call male-centered comedy, Peter Lefcourt also, I admired all of his books. So I aspired to write something like that. And that kind of became a series, especially since the first one had already been, I'd kind of set the stage with a screenplay I couldn't sell. And then I found out, wow, there is a difference between, describing everything on the page and leaving it to the director to, so that was a lesson learned. But then on the mystery series, I didn't necessarily set out to write a mystery for the first one. It had to do with go back to what you know. And my forebears are from farmland in southern Missouri. The setting where Ozark is now, Ozark series. And I was raised a Southern Baptist. I'm kind of a profound I don't knowist now, but back then I was a student minister. I had a lot of Bible study and theology, and even in college. And like my hero, who goes to Harvard Divinity School and drops out, I also studied astronomy and astrophysics. And because I wanted answers to the big question, how, did it get created in 7 days, or is there such a thing as eternity? And why is there something rather than nothing? Leibniz and Spinoza. So my main character, who's formed around that as an amateur sleuth, and that amateur sleuth is really wonderful, because you see, in a mystery, if you were to write what the typical Law and Order from TV, really any of those come under the huge umbrella of police procedural. Okay, sure. You really must know, you either retired from law enforcement, or you studied criminology, or you're a lawyer who knows criminal law, but you'd better not trip up
lots of technical advisors.
Yeah, you better not trip up on your forensics or your police procedure, because your fans are going to catch you.
And there'll be a YouTube video about what's wrong with your story. Yeah.
But as an amateur sleuth,
sure,
he doesn't have to know any more than I do. He can stumble into it. And of course, I do end up having to research. If I'm going to talk about near-death experience, and especially coma, which is also covered in this book, and long-term dementia, I had to research the Missouri law on right to die. And it turns out that the so-called right to die varies from one state to the other. I mean, euthanasia is actually legal, and I think it's still legal in Oregon. But in most of the states, there's two phases of it. First is there's the respirator, which we all now know from COVID, okay, that's keeping you breathing. And then there's the feeding tube, okay? Well, under most states, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV from time to time. And in most states, you can remove the respirator if the doctor has diagnosed this is going to be a long-term coma, there's probably no hope. We got a flat brain wave, probably no hope of coming out of it. Remove the respirator and see whether the brain stem will breathe on its own. Okay, so if they're breathing on their own, after you remove the respirator, they're in a prolonged vegetative state. In Missouri, you cannot remove the feeding tube. That is killing them. Okay, and more importantly, from the standpoint of state law, that is permitting their heirs to kill them. that is, and it comes down to, and it turns out that not only in the fundamentalist Christian doctrine, but also in conservative, not conservative, in Orthodox Judaism, again, and in certain other faiths, there is the widespread belief only God can take a life. God makes a deliberate decision when you are to exit this world. Well, if that's the case, then we can't have doctors conferring with families asking them when we should do it.
Well, and that gets, I mean, I won't get into it because it's a personal, and it will take us down a whole other
path.
Of course. It is the same problem. My mother had the same thing, dying of cancer, and the doctors wanted to remove the feeding tube and just let her die. And as conservative Christians ourselves, that was the question. It's like, all we're doing, I mean, we're not stopping a breathing machine. All we're doing is not feeding her, and she'll starve to death. And these medical things create all kinds of dilemmas and problems that should be explored in books.
Well, and of course we've got the advanced directive now is being put forth by personal physicians, but also at the encouragement of the insurance industry that wants to mitigate costs, and yet it's a sensible thing to do, because the physicians don't want to be in a situation where they feel like they're having to make decisions for people that the person should have made for themselves if they possibly could have. Mm-hmm. So with the Evan Wycliff series, I had not intended to write a mystery, as I say, but I did want to set a book in Southern Missouri, and I did want the main character to be not a minister, but somebody who, he's not unemployed, but he's like a guest preacher sometimes, and he's also a skip tracer because he's a good investigator. He's not a lowlife. He's obviously an but he's, some nights, let's face it, his best friend is Jack Daniels. He just like doesn't, he doesn't. So really
who's your audience for this, for these books?
Well, that gets into the question of whether you would consider this Christian fiction. I don't.
Yeah, that's the
I
next
mean,
question.
there are the Father Brown mysteries. There's Marvin J. Wolf's wonderful Rabbi Ben series.
Right.
These are mysteries that where the main character happens to have a particular vocation, and yes, for people who are of that background, there's a richness in the book that perhaps other people won't find. I mean, Evan is wrestling with a lot of ethical and moral decisions, and they're not trivial at all. But the beginning of Preacher Finds a Corpse, which was the first in the series, was actually a family tragedy in my family. Was that my uncle actually shot himself at way before his time. I believe he was in his early 50s. And there was I don't know whether you call it misunderstanding and mismanagement. It had to do with deed to the family farm that was contested. And it turns out, after I researched it, it went way back to the fact that Missouri was the no man's land during the Civil War. And, the Union soldiers came and pushed people out of their houses and said, you can come back after the war's over. Well, people come back and there's the settlers. Oh, this is our house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The squatters. And, but then even before that, the Union Army had chased the Osage Indians off that land and driven them all to Oklahoma, where they didn't look like anything like where they were used to living, but that's where they all got pushed. So there was the open question about that mystery was the foundational. I mean, that really literally happens in the early pages. Is Preacher finds he finds his best friend dead in a cornfield. And the question is, okay, this really looks like suicide. Okay, maybe it is. I don't think he was that kind of I don't think he was at that point.
Right.
But is it possible somebody drove him to it? And is that murder? It's certainly a sin. Right. Why would they want him out of the way? What is it?
So you're writing out of the depths of your own soul for a lot of this.
Well, and that's why the series has been gratifying. Yes, because Preacher Fakes a Miracle had to do with I had a stepson who suffered from schizophrenia, and most of his teenage years were really a huge trial for the family, for him, and for everybody around him, and so that the foundation of that book was a character that had a teenage boy that had schizophrenia that Evan befriends, and that he's hearing voices, and the people here in rural America are saying, well, he's possessed by demons, and so we need somebody to cast them out, or they're saying he's not a responsible, he'll never be a responsible member of society, and yet a patient with schizophrenia who's got the right drug cocktail, probably you might not even know whether they're maintaining in the outside world. So I had that, and then I had him having having a relationship with a teenage girl who had epilepsy. And so they're both outcasts, and they're both being ostracized by the society. They're both in clinical care, but they're being ostracized even by their own families. And then the girl gets kidnapped. And so then Evan's really got to go after, this is a teenage abduction story, which has probably got more edge to it than the other books in the series, just because it's got that threat. But then,
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to give people a chance to pop in their questions if they have some burning questions, but I also want to come at a couple of different things. So, you talked about the question about, well, are these Christian novels? Not really, but they're coming from a lot of your own wrestling with some of these questions in your own family's life and whatnot. What kind of market research are you doing, or are you just writing for the pure, shall I say, catharsis of it? Because it's a story within you just want to get out? Or are you, you've written so many books now that you're kind of beyond that. Well, I have this thing inside of me, I just need to get down on paper and get it out. It's like, no,
well, it still is that.
Okay.
Whatever the book is, and whether the choice of genre may be more like, well, do I feel like Chinese or do I feel like Mexican? I mean, it's one of
Okay.
those. But and people have asked whether Preacher Raises the Dead is the third and last in the series, and I will say it has. I deliberately had it have what I think is a satisfying ending in that it does tie up the major plot threads, but it does have a couple of cliffhangers literally on the last page that might or might not be answered. I mean, it depends upon whether the fans really insist on them being answered. But I do, as I've said before, on interviews with you guys, is that I just deliberately do not have an outline. I do not spin out the plot ahead of time.
So you are a pantser.
I write to please myself, and I write mainly to surprise myself. Because anytime there's a time for a plot twist, the first rule is always make the interesting choice, try to make the unexpected choice, try to surprise myself, try to please myself. And then that way, I doubt that the reader's going to say, oh, this is so predictable.
So talk a little bit about your process. When you sit down, blank page, and you're not working from an outline, so you have an idea kind of where you want to go, or do you think of it as scenes?
Well, with Preacher Raises the Dead, I knew that I wanted to explore the transition between life and death, and I wanted, near-death experience. A near-death experience happens. Actually, I'll read on Sunday. It reads its own. I'll read that. It won't be that much of a spoiler because it happens in the early pages of the book. He experienced a near-death experience. But the thing is that this is at the outbreak of COVID, and his mentor, the African American who's the Baptist minister there in the little town, has decided it's time to retire. I'm just, I just want to get out of this. And he says, Evan, you're the guy for the job. I'm sorry, even if you don't want it, you're the guy for it. So you're full. It turns out, my research said, Southern Baptist Convention says, you don't need a PhD. It's whoever the board of deacons says is the preacher. You could be a pots and pan salesman. Okay, you know how to bring the souls in, so you be our preacher. Okay, so Evan gets made full-time minister. Well, he realizes that, wait, there's visiting the sick and the dying. There's conducting weddings, and my God, there's officiating at funerals. This is hard work.
Yes.
And so he goes in and conducts. He encounters near-death experience. But then also, I wanted to get into these questions of his own. Okay, if this woman came back, did she experience anything on the other side? This person over here who's in long-term coma, is there any, they're telling us there's no life there, but there are people who awaken from, what am I supposed to tell my congregants? What am I supposed to tell my parishioners about this? They want to give them the last rites, and yet, and maybe not. Like you said, there's these situations, and so he gets caught up in that. And you could say, in some ways, Preacher Raises the Dead is more like what they would say a cozy mystery, because there's no firearms, there's no explosions going off. But then again, you've got some pretty disturbing evil. Look, why do bad things happen to good people? You've got some people who I will say may not necessarily be evil to the bone, but maybe they're land grabbers, or they're greedy, or you've got a lot of that kind of thing going, and you've got gossip, in a small town. So you've got a lot of intrigue. This is the kind of stuff that makes, adult drama, if you will, or soap opera, we used to call it. But so that's how it got to be a mystery, was the unfolding of the inquiring mind. John le Carré calls it the close observer, and he says all spies are close observers. Well, if you read a John le Carré novel, he teaches you as a reader to be a close observer, because if you don't follow closely, you're going to miss the point, because he's got the clues buried so deep. Yeah. You'll go, what?
We just saw Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile as a pre-release. And
I know that story, but I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, we know the story because it's been done, years ago. But the new one is actually worth seeing. But it's one of those frustrations of Agatha Christie, because I love her characterizations, but you're like things in the last little bit of the book, and you're like, wait a minute, had I known this an hour ago, then I might have gone a different direction, but
I'm not sure that formula really works for today's audiences either, because I mean, I went back and screened some of the old Thin Man, and the Thin Man has the same kind of thing where, in the last scene he's rounding up everybody in the dining room, and he's and suddenly he turns to the blonde you never suspected and said, why did you do it?
Right. Yeah.
And
I love the comedy Murder by Death, if you've seen that, with Peter Sellers.
Oh yes,
because it parodies all of these mystery genre writers, and at the end Truman Capote outs all of them on the things they did that they shouldn't have done if they were really legitimate writers, and Agatha Christie, of course, was the one who introduced characters the last few pages of the book, and it changed everything. So well, I got a couple questions that have come in. People want to know a little bit more about not writing query letters to agents, and what's their alternative if they're self-publishing, or is getting an agent just the long shot? I've been telling people you really got to have an audience.
My experience was, I mean, I would write 100 email queries to agents, and you have to be careful when you do that, because you can't send the same to each one, because they all have different submission requirements. You have to go to that submission tab on the agency and see. Sometimes they'll actually specify the order of the things in the query letter and how to paste in the sample. They want 10-page sample or 20-page sample or one chapter sample as an attachment. They're all different, and to some extent they'll use that as a test of whether you have researched them first. Okay, and that'll get you in the trash bin pretty quick. But it will, they will tell you it's going to take 2 to 6 weeks for them to respond to you. Okay, if you've queried 100 agents, you probably going to get maybe half a dozen who are willing to see any more, and of those you might get one or two that are willing to take it out. If they take it out, that's 4 to 6 weeks for it to, the publisher's got to do the same thing. It's got to go through the reader. The reader's got to go through the acquisitions editor. Then the acquisitions editor's got to find out what developmental editors are available, all like this. Okay, so it's going to probably take the publisher a couple of months at the very least to respond to the agent as to whether they want it. Then you're going to go through contract negotiations for probably a couple of weeks just to get the fine points down. And then the thing about traditional publishing that I think a lot of writers don't appreciate because they haven't been through the process is that you lose a lot of control.
Yes,
you are not going to be consulted on the cover. You're not going to be consulted on the number of pages, because that's a printing consideration, the paper cost versus the cover price. They're not going to ask you about the cover price. So you might find they've printed it in a really tiny font so that they don't have to use as many pages. But the other thing is, in traditional publishing, and this is wacko, and Amazon's destroyed all this, but in traditional publishing, they have spring catalog and they have fall catalog. If you don't make this spring catalog, you're in the fall catalog. Okay, well, what happened? This is a beach read for summer. I want to come out with it in June. No, you can't, because it didn't make it into our spring catalog.
Right.
Okay, and then their promotions are around, it used to be around the book shows and whatever all. So you're going to lose a lot of control. So, and also at the max, you're getting 15% of wholesale. Maybe if it's your first novel, you're getting 10% of wholesale. You're getting about $1 a book on a good day.
So
if it's a paperback.
Yeah, is there any? I have a friend who's a 4-time New York Times bestselling author, and she gets 50 cents for her $26 hardback and royalties, and she says that's just cute, and everything now she's doing is all self-published because she realizes she can make a lot more money and be in control of the process.
Well, and what I would say, regardless of how you feel about traditional publishing, and I'm not going to throw totally cold water on that, especially if you've written a series that is successful, okay, in that it's got what they would call mid-list numbers up to like 25,000 fan base, something like that. Mm-hmm. If you've got that and you can substantiate those numbers, or the size of your mailing list or whatever, and you've got an idea for another series with a different character, Pitch that first book. You can't, I found out you can't pitch the second or third in the series. They don't want it. Because they think that those children have already been eaten. Okay.
Yes.
So it might go that way, but I'd say especially for our first novel, and especially for some of us who aren't getting any younger and can't really necessarily invest 2 more years before you find out you're going to be, on the New York Times bestseller list, just get in the game, because the promotion that you will do, that you will necessarily do, which is, a whole, again, we've had whole meetings about this, pre-orders and book publicists and interviews and email lists and social media posts and sponsored ads and various kinds of good giveaways. Okay, that's all part of the whole marketing campaign. And I can't tell you if any one particular thing works. You basically, you have to throw it all against the wall. Okay, around your release date and starting a couple of months early. But the bad news, if you will, the good news for self-publishers is that a conventional publisher is going to expect you to do all that yourself anyway.
Right.
Okay, the same amount of effort, the same amount of money that you would. They're not going to give you an advertising budget. They're going to give you the name of the publicist in New York who's got 1,000 other writers on the phone. Okay, and they may send you their mailing list or not, or they'll send out for you. But they'll give you a 1 or 2 hour consult on the phone, and that might be the only time you ever talk to that person. Okay, and they'll say, oh, well, we'll have you in, the next book trade show, or we'll put you in the fall catalog, or whatever the hell it happens to be. But bottom line is, if you self-publish, or if you that can be complex, it can be a fair amount of work. And I have my own small press, my own imprint, and that's the way a lot of self-publishers do it. But these days there are reputable hybrid publishers. Okay. I can't list them for you because I'm not as an endorsement, but you will pay them for the cover, you will pay them for the book layout, you will pay them for printing supervision, and you will pay them for their supervising distribution, perhaps. But you will still be doing your own publicity. But the good news for that is the technical part of that is really pretty much on their shoulders to come up with something good. And you've got to really kind of interview them and look at their sites and see don't go to a cozy mystery publisher with your hardcore shoot 'em up adventure. Okay, I mean, you want something that will fit in their catalog. That shouldn't be hard to figure out. But do that. But the bottom line here, and this is the thing I would just plead with you to do, is get in the game. Yeah. Finish that book. Get a developmental editor or beta readers, your friends, but then also a professional copy reader, another pair of eyes, because I have worked as a copy editor. I consider myself not a novice at this. And I'll find typos every time I go through a manuscript, every time. And I've had professional copy editors who I had a beta reader the other day caught a glaring error. Instead of saying demonic possession, I said demonic position. It missed, everybody missed it. Wow. Everybody missed it. It's actually, if you buy a copy of the book and it was in the last print run, you've got a collectible book now by Gerald Everett Jones. If you just see if it says demonic position. So please get professional copy editing, but then you will get in the game. And after a year, you would give it a year. Okay, book launch, book release, all the things that go around it. And, you take your IWOSC courses and listen to what Steven and his friends say about how to promote, maybe hire a publicist, maybe, work with some social media people, but get your name out there, get your book out there. And after a year, you will know so much more about what it is to be in the game. And I would say the thing that you have to think of yourself as a member of a garage band. Okay, garage bands don't play the Hollywood Bowl the first time out. A limousine doesn't pull up to the garage and say, hey guys, like to go on world tour? No, you're playing on street corners for whoever will listen. You're playing because you want to hear yourself play. You're playing because you need to learn to collaborate with your fellow professionals, because the mark of a bad band is every one of them is trying to be louder than the others. Okay, so you're going to learn musicianship. Well, all that stuff is part of being an artist. And yes, even if it's not movie making, but a book still has got a whole red shirt team advising you on, like you said, that it may require some market research. If you're going to go into, for example, I was approached with contract to write, actually it was The Wheel of Time. They wanted me to write the screenplay for that. This was years ago, and it didn't work out. But I didn't know anything about those particular genres and I found out those are called in-hopping books. Those plots are in-hopping because what you do is you got a small band of people on horseback or dragonback or camelback, and they're on a quest, and they've got to get to, the Joseph Campbell, they've got to get to the prize at the end of in the bottom of the box, but they've got to go through all these different cities and difficult routes to get to it. But every oasis or inn that they go to is a safe place. So that's a place to, but that's where they're going to be tonight. But between now and then, they've got to fight fire-eating dragons, armies of people. And in the Campbell books, of course, the formula is you have whatever opponent wants to prevent you from getting to the next inn, you have to defeat them with their tools. That's how you prove you are a superhero, is swords? You want sword? I don't care what you do now. Or that Butch Cassidy, rules in a knife fight?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love your advice about just get in the game. I mean, they always say, the first million is the hardest. And it's the same, right? I mean, it's the same thing. The first job, getting the first job is always the hardest. The first whatever is always the hardest. And once you've done that, you've learned something. You kind of know a little bit.
Well, and so many of us, and I've said it too, but so many of us express, I love writing. I feel as though I'm a competent writer, but I really hate doing that. I got no talent at doing that. Well, guess what? Number one, it's kind of a requirement, but number two, if you spend that year at it, you're going to find out that there's aspects of it you really enjoy. And that's the part and again, when it comes to, and it was a special contrast, because when I wrote what I knew about living in Kenya, that was literary fiction. That was because I admired Graham Greene and John le Carre, and Well, in marketing Harry Harambe's Kenyan Sundowner, and I had Desiree Duffy as my publicist, one of the things that I discovered yet again is that there is no genre formula for marketing literary fiction. The only thing that you can advertise is the author's name as a brand. The cover's not going to do it. The plot is not going to do it, because it's a much more subtle and sophisticated sell than that. But if you're going to be concentrating on selling the author's name as a brand, that's not something that happens in 2 months. Even if you're way out in advance in front of your book advance, that's a whole lifetime of, if this one doesn't find its audience, then you pick up your pen and you write the next one. And it is a long game. And as I say, you find the parts of it that you really enjoy, like my speaking to you tonight. Okay, this is not a chore. Okay,
right? Yeah, exactly.
And I find some gratification also and again, one of the reasons that I'm in IWOSC is they say, well, Gerald, would you like to be an officer? No, I don't really want to have the responsibilities of an officer, but I love to share. So I'll be happy to share anytime you ask me. So that's the deal. That's the transactional deal. Okay. But that's a part that I enjoy. So now I have a publicist who only works at getting radio and TV gigs. Okay. And so then I've got some social media types who know Instagram so much better than I do. And we're beginning a brand new model that I didn't even hear about until a couple of months ago. And I won't guarantee I won't go near TikTok, but I just don't.
I was going to say, I'm waiting for your TikTok dance video.
I don't think I've got the chops for that, but I'm not, never say never, because it's a changing landscape. But yeah, find the parts that you enjoy. But then, because you spent some time at it, because you've tried and you haven't been afraid to fail at anything that you've tried, because the only way the only way there's a lesson learned is if you've failed and you've recovered. Because if you read a book from some expert, and I don't care how expert they are, it could be James Patterson, okay? If they're just repeating something that their professor told them, that's not a lesson learned, okay? No. And it certainly could be old news, but you've got fresh lessons learned, and you know some stuff that you hate to do, okay? Or that you know that you don't do well, or you know that really aggravate you. Okay, that's when we're going to go out to, elance.com, guru.com, try to find those people who it's difficult if you get somebody in India or
sure,
when it's not English when this English is a second language, because guess what? They've been trained in British grammar and style.
Right.
You'll be correcting their copy. I found that out the hard way. So don't hire an editor. I love, I'll probably be going back to India at some place, but don't hire them necessarily as freelancers unless they study University of Chicago. So
that's the advantage of IWOSC and we're looking for opportunities, coming up to give people more opportunities to ask their questions and get connected with people, because there's a lot of, and with all the publishers kind of closing their doors or being eaten by each other, there's a lot of people out there that are putting out their shingle and doing everything from, like you said, developmental editing to layout to covers to marketing to publicists, and not all of them are know what they're doing, but after a while that kind of shakes out and you get to know, well, here are the ones that so-and-so uses. Like you mentioned, Desiree Duffy right. And all. After a while, you get to know, it's like, well, these are all IWOSC people. These are all people that all kind of know each other. They know who to go to. Yeah, and well, but they know who to go to. They know who
absolutely.
I mean, I've had a couple of people that it's like, I thought this person was an expert, and someone said, oh yeah, no, we're not going to have them, on the platform again. And I went, would you talk to me privately about why that is? And that was shared with me, and I went, oh, I didn't know that about them. Right. That's helpful. In fact, you've even said that in the past. There were some things about some people that were selling their advice or whatever. And
we have a conflict of interest. Also, is the agents that out the back door are also hybrid publishers. Yes. I wouldn't say that they're all. I mean, they have a conflict of interest by definition. Right. I would say that I understand why they're doing that to pay their bills. But sure. If you submit to an agent who says, I'll be happy to represent this, but this needs editing and our fee will be $1,200, that's kind of a giveaway that they might be in the business of editing stuff rather than, because, they sent it to the publisher after we edited, came back, hey, maybe there isn't a market for it. It's not our fault. So there's those kinds of things that go on, true. But I will say that I think that being in IWOSC, and I used to work the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books every year. It was great when people would walk up to the booth and, we would just get to talking. And it's a matter of, you really don't know where that assistance is going to come from. I mean, if you really want to get back to basics, the whole let go and let God, you can have a coach telling you, all right, and this is the fallacy of the acting coach. Okay, use the Jones method, which has 10 steps, and you'll nail that audition. Okay. Right. Well, guess what? They're going to cast Richard Dreyfuss in the lead, and he's 3 feet tall.
Right.
And you're not you're 6 feet tall as a leading lady. You are not going to make that. You're not going to have that part. We're not. Nope. There's not an apple box big enough for him to stand on.
Exactly.
Okay. And so that's the fallacy of do it my way and you will succeed. Yes, have that expert coaching. And I want an expert piece of coaching that I got from watching Dan Brown's masterclass. And I like Dan Brown, and I honor, again, I'll buy a Dan Brown book because I like Dan Brown's work. Okay. Right. It's not because it's a mystery or it's sci-fi or it's, I want a piece of Dan Brown's mind.
Exactly.
Okay. And I had thought, this was my preconception. I thought, okay, he's famous for page turners and cliffhangers. And I bet he's going to tell me how you back somebody into the corner of a room and then flood it with gasoline, or, what, and there's no way, you think, no way. I also, Lee David's Zlotov, MacGyver, same thing. But the takeaway from from Dan Brown that was really significant and that helped me immensely in writing mysteries was make promises to the reader, make lots of promises to the reader, and never end a chapter without a promise.
Yep.
That, and the promise is just simply, if you turn the page, you're going to find out where, what happens next. I mean, you've got to create that curiosity. And that's the difference between, let's say, you don't take your chapters out of your book and try to get them published as short stories, because a short story has a theme and a resolution and is a nice self-contained experience about it, like finishing the book does. Mm-hmm. But a book chapter is, you make those promises, and there's still those more. The minute you get one answer, there's 5 more, and that's why it can't be Christian fiction per se, because I mean the apocryphal stuff that Megiddo and the Left Behind series, okay, it's all about having answers. The people coming to these books, perhaps want an answer about what's it going to be like, or what should I believe. The Evan Wycliff books are all way more answers, way more questions than answers. Okay, I mean, he's reading astrophysics. I mean, I just, and part of it came out of astrophysics books I just read. Brian Greene is, the physicists are saying now there literally is no such thing as eternity. Once the universe expands past a certain density, complex minds, nothing complex is going to be able to form. There will be no such thing as thought, because there will not be nothing that will be able to think at that point in the entire universe. Now, maybe somebody's going to come along next week and go, oh, well, no, the next theory is it all clumps back together. And okay, but again, these are things that are coming at us in this information age, where, there was a Buddhist meditation the other day that I heard where it said, there's no such thing as a self. There's no soul. There's nothing that goes on. Stephen, this will be not in your tradition, right?
No, not. No. I would strongly disagree, but
right, but their explanation was fascinating. Is that what we think of as a self, or what we think of as essential soul, is the sum total of the opinions that our brain has made about our bodies, our experiences, and we are meaning-making machines. And from the time that we've been 2 years old, we're making meaning about who am I? What am I going to be today? What am I going to do today? Well, the sum total of all those is you. But when the computer that devised that story about you is gone. So,
well, there's so many things we don't know. I mean, quantum physics and all that is changing the nature of things. Remember when I learned that time tracks differently. They found out when the astronauts went up in space, and they realized that time moves at a different pace.
That's right.
The further you get off the planet, it's like, wait a minute, my whole life is based on linear. What does that mean in terms of eternity and all those things? So there's some questions out there.
This GPS that we're so used to, it was a scientist who explained to me, a NASA scientist, who actually the satellite is so far away in its stationary orbit that the time it takes the GPS signal to get from your Apple Watch up there and then back down, actually they have to do a time correction up there.
That makes sense.
A few nanoseconds, because of Einstein relativity, is that its clock is not moving at the same rate that yours is.
Well, anyone who has DirecTV understands that it takes a little while to bounce off that satellite. So, well, Gerald, thank you for going over there and your time tonight. Like I said, it's been absolutely phenomenal to get into your mind and kind of see how you put it. I didn't know a lot of this, and it's interesting to hear how much of this is just out of your own life and things that were curious to you, and that's encouraging to hear that you can have 12 novels, and a lot of it just comes out of your time in Africa, things that have happened in your own family.
If I'm going to do a promotional campaign, I want to know that the mystery writer William Kent Kruger also writes about rural locations and amateur sleuth kind of main characters. Okay, well, that's probably where the similarity ends. But I will say that if I was going to book an ad, then I might really be happy that my book cover shows up alongside his on Amazon, rather than beside James Patterson, who is writing police procedurals from the standpoint of an FBI investigator. That's not my audience, and I don't even pretend to be in that. I'm not going to blow anything up, just so that it'll make an interesting movie.
All right. Well, if you want to hear more, or actually hear Gerald read from Preacher Raises the Dead, plug for
Spoiler
Sunday,
alert.
right? You're going to be reading on Sunday
That's
at
right.
IWOSC Reads Its Own. So there's a good chance to actually hear Gerald, do his own audiobook version of Preacher. And lots more to come, folks. So like I said, we've got that coming up on Sunday. And Gerald, if they wanted to get a hold of you, I know you're already out there on Get Published Radio, as well as you said your book reviews, which I've been on your list for a while now, and I get your book reviews on email as well. So I know they can do that. How do people get a hold of you if they want to find out more about what you're doing or the next books you've got coming out?
Yeah. Well, if you want to jump into the Evan Wycliff Preacher series, my website, GeraldEverettJones.com, and that's Everett with 2 T's. And that way I'm distinguished from, Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. If you go to the landing page of GeraldEverettJones.com, you're going to find a button that'll get you a complimentary ebook of Preacher Finds a Corpse, the first book in the series. And that will, truth in advertising, that will plug you into the mailing list so that every Sunday you'll find out what was on the blog, which you can unsubscribe from or ignore or delight in. And then if you want to email me directly, that's my first name, Gerald, at La Puerta, LAPUERTA, Spanish for the door, .tv, like television, Gerald at La Puerta TV. So please, feel free to reach out to me, and but by all means, get acquainted with Evan Wycliff, because hey, it's free for a limited time, as they say downtown.
Hey, there you go. Well, very good. Well, thank you, Gerald. Appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody who joined us tonight. I hope it was as good for you as it was for me. And enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll see you all on Sunday.
Thank you, Steven. You're such a congenial host.
Thanks, Gerald.
I appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. Good night.